I remember the exact moment the keypad code stopped working because it was so stupidly ordinary that it almost didn't register as suspicious. It was a Thursday evening in late October, the kind where the sun drops too fast and the air smells faintly like wood smoke from someone's fireplace down the block. I'd just gotten home from work, balancing my laptop bag, a grocery sack, and my phone wedged under my chin while trying to unlock the side door that leads through the garage. The garage had been my husband Mark's obsession for the past 3 months. Before that, it was just a normal suburban garage in our Columbus neighborhood. 2-car space, concrete floor stained with old oil marks from the previous owner, shelves filled with half-used paint cans and holiday decorations. Nothing special. Then, one night at dinner, Mark said he wanted to remodel it. "For you," he said, pointing his fork at me like it was some romantic declaration. I laughed. "For me? What am I supposed to do in a garage?" "You're always saying you want space," he said. "A studio, somewhere quiet, somewhere to paint." I did paint, technically. Mostly small acrylic stuff I posted online and sold occasionally. It wasn't some big career dream, just something I loved doing after long days at the marketing firm downtown. But Mark talked about it like he was building the Sistine Chapel. New drywall, insulation, better lighting, a heater for the winter. He even installed those sleek gray storage cabinets you see in fancy home renovation shows. Then he added the keypad lock on the interior garage door. "At night I want to keep tools locked up," he explained, just in case. The code was our anniversary. I punched it every day for 2 months. Until that Thursday. The keypad blinked red. I frowned and tried again. Red light. "Huh," I muttered, shifting the grocery bag in my arm. "Maybe I typed wrong." Red again. At that moment, I wasn't thinking cheating or secret lives or anything dramatic. I was thinking my husband had probably messed with the settings again because he loved tinkering with things that weren't broken. So I went around to the front door. Mark was already home, sitting at the kitchen island with his laptop open and a half-drunk beer beside him. "You changed the garage code?" I asked, dropping the groceries on the counter. He barely looked up. "Yeah." That was it. Just, yeah. No explanation, no apology, nothing. I waited a second. "Okay, what is it now?" "I'll show you later," he said, still typing. Something about that answer made my stomach tighten slightly, like when you notice a weird smell in the house but can't find where it's coming from. "Why later?" I asked. "Because I'm busy right now, Jess." He said it in that tone, the one that meant he was already irritated. Mark had always been the calm one in our relationship, even-tempered, logical. He worked as a project manager for a regional construction company and had that steady, methodical personality that made everyone trust him immediately, which is probably why I ignored the weird feeling. I just shrugged and started putting groceries away. Dinner that night was normal. Spaghetti, a glass of cheap red wine, one of our usual Thursday Netflix shows playing in the background. Mark laughed at the same parts he always laughed at. He even rubbed my shoulders while I washed dishes. If anything, he seemed extra relaxed. The garage code slipped out of my mind completely, until 2 days later. Saturday morning, I woke up early because Mark had already left the house. That wasn't unusual either. For the past few months, he'd been spending weekends volunteering. The first time he mentioned it, I thought it was sweet. "There's this community housing project on the east side," he said, helping repair homes for families that can't afford contractors. It made perfect sense for him. Construction background, handy with tools, and Mark always liked feeling useful. So every Saturday, he'd head out around 7 a.m., work most of the day, and come home dusty and tired, but weirdly satisfied. I admired that about him. That morning, I made coffee and decided I'd finally set up the painting space he'd supposedly built for me. The garage looked great, I'll admit that. Fresh white walls, bright LED strip lights, a clean epoxy floor. The cabinets all on the back wall were perfectly organized with labeled bins for nails, screws, and tools. But the weird thing was, my studio area was still empty. Mark kept saying he was finishing the last touches. I carried an easel out there and plugged in a small speaker. Then I realized I needed the storage cabinets for brushes and paints. They were locked. That annoyed me. So I walked back into the house and checked the keypad again. Red light. I sighed and called Mark. He picked up after 2 rings. "Hey," he said, slightly out of breath. "Hey, what's the new garage code?" There was a pause. "Why?" "I'm trying to set up my stuff out here." Another pause. "You don't need to be in there today." I laughed a little because I thought he was joking. "What?" "I'm still working on some things," he said. "Just wait until next week." I stared at the locked cabinet. "Mark, it's a garage." "Jess." Now his voice had that sharp edge. "Just leave it for now, okay?" Something cold slid through my chest. It wasn't what he said, it was how quickly he shut it down. "Are you at the volunteer site?" I asked. "Yeah." "What are you working on today?" "Just framing stuff." "Where exactly is it again?"
"Jess," he said slowly, "why are you interrogating me?" My stomach flipped. "I'm not interrogating you." "Feels like it." Then he changed the subject so fast it almost made my head spin. "Did you get the groceries I asked for?" And somehow, unbelievably, the conversation drifted away from the garage. That night he came home around 6. His clothes were dusty like always. There was drywall powder on his boots. He smelled like sawdust and sweat. He kissed me on the forehead. "Long day," he said. At dinner, I brought it up again. "So, what's the new code?" "Oh, right." He took a sip of water. "I'll program your fingerprint tomorrow." "My fingerprint?" "Yeah, it's easier." "Why not just give me the number?" "It's safer." I laughed. "Safer from who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up and carried his plate to the sink. And that's when the second weird thing happened. His phone lit up on the table. A text message preview. I wasn't snooping, I just glanced automatically the way people do. The contact name wasn't saved, just a number. And the message said, "Are you coming back tonight?" My chest tightened instantly. Because the next line said, "She keeps asking about the garage." The air around me suddenly felt too thin. I stared at the phone like it might explode. Then the screen went dark. From the kitchen, Mark called casually, "You want more wine?" And for the first time in 10 years of marriage, a thought slipped into my mind that I couldn't push away. What if my husband wasn't volunteering anywhere? What if the garage wasn't for me at all? And what if the reason the code changed was because I wasn't supposed to get inside anymore? I didn't say anything about the text that night. Looking back, I still don't know if that was denial or instinct. Maybe both. When something cracks in the middle of a life you've built, your brain doesn't always rush toward the truth.
Sometimes it circles it slowly, like it's afraid to touch it. Mark came back to the table with the wine bottle and poured another glass for me like nothing had happened. His movements were calm, familiar, automatic. The same way he'd moved through our kitchen for the past 10 years. And that made it harder to breathe. Because the message I saw didn't fit into that normal picture at all. She keeps asking about the garage. Not my wife, not Jess, just she. I kept replaying it in my head while he talked about something mundane. One of the guys at work messing up a bid. Some delay on a commercial project his company was managing. I nodded when I was supposed to nod. I even laughed once. But the entire time my mind was running in the background like a computer program that wouldn't shut off. Are you coming back tonight? Coming back where? And why would anyone say that unless Mark had somewhere else he regularly went? When we went upstairs later, he showered while I brushed my teeth. The sound of the water running filled the bathroom. Steam started creeping across the mirror. Normally, we'd talk through the door, little random conversations about work or weekend plans. That night, I stood there staring at my own reflection and felt like a stranger inside my own house. I tried to think logically. Maybe it was someone from the volunteer project. Maybe coming back tonight meant finishing work on a house. Maybe she meant someone else entirely, except my gut didn't believe any of those explanations. Mark came out of the shower with a towel around his waist and smiled like everything was fine. "You coming to bed?" "Yeah," I said. We got under the blankets. The room was dark except for the faint streetlight glow coming through the blinds. Usually Mark fell asleep fast, but that night he stayed on his phone for a while, screen lighting up his face in the dark. I rolled onto my side, pretending to sleep. At one point he turned away from me slightly and typed something longer than a quick message. Then the phone went dark again. A few minutes later, he put it on the nightstand. "Night," he said softly. I murmured something back. But I didn't sleep. Not really. I kept staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing slowly deepen beside me. And sometime around 2 a.m, after lying there for what felt like hours, I quietly slid out of bed. Mark didn't move. I grabbed his phone. My hands were shaking. We'd never had phone rules in our marriage. We both knew each other's passcodes. It had never been an issue. His code was still the same, our old house number from the first place we rented together. The screen opened instantly. My heart started pounding so loud I was sure I would wake him. I went straight to the messages. The number from earlier was at the top. No contact name, just a string of texts. The first one I saw was the one from dinner. "Are you coming back tonight?" Below it was Mark's reply. "Not tonight. She's home." My stomach dropped so hard it actually made me dizzy. I kept scrolling. More messages. Dozens of them. Most were short, casual, familiar in a way that made my chest feel hollow. "You left your jacket here. Bring more screws tomorrow. Dinner was good tonight. I miss you already." That last one made my hands go cold, because Mark had responded to it. "I'll see you Saturday." Saturday. Volunteer day.
I felt like the room tilted slightly. My eyes kept moving down the conversation even though part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room. Then I saw something that made everything snap into place in the worst possible way. A photo. It wasn't explicit, nothing dramatic. Just a picture of the inside of a room. Fresh drywall, gray cabinets, bright LED strip lights along the ceiling. My breath caught in my throat. It was our garage. Except in the photo there was a couch against the wall, a small rug on the epoxy floor, a lamp, and a woman's purse sitting on the cabinet. The message under the photo said, "Feels more like home every day." I stopped breathing. Every instinct in my body screamed at me that I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to see. That the room I thought my husband was building for me had somehow turned into something else entirely. Something private, something shared, with someone who definitely wasn't me. And I noticed the timestamps. The photo had been sent 3 days earlier, while I was at work. While Mark had texted me around noon saying he was running errands. My heart was hammering so hard now I had to press my hand against my chest. I scrolled further. More messages, more photos. Not of them together, just pieces of a life. A takeout container on the garage counter, a blanket draped over the couch, a coffee mug. And in one photo, barely visible in the corner, a pair of women's shoes, high heels. I slowly looked toward the bedroom door, the hallway beyond it, the stairs that led down to the garage I had walked through almost every day without realizing something completely different was happening inside it. Mark shifted slightly in bed. I froze. He mumbled something in his sleep but didn't wake up. I locked the phone and placed it back exactly where it had been. Then I slipped back under the covers. My whole body felt numb, because the pieces were starting to form a picture whether I wanted them to or not. The keypad code change, the locked cabinets, the weekends, the text saying, "Coming back tonight," and that photo. My husband hadn't remodeled the garage into an art studio. He had turned it into some kind of private apartment, right under our house, and somehow someone else had been living in it. I stared into the darkness until morning. When Mark's alarm went off at 6:30, I pretended to wake up normally. He stretched, yawned, kissed my cheek. "Morning, morning," I said. My voice sounded surprisingly steady. He got dressed quickly. Saturday again. Volunteer day. Before leaving, he grabbed his keys and phone from the nightstand. "I'll probably be late tonight," he said. "Big job today." I nodded. "Okay." He hesitated for a moment, studying my face. "You all right?" "Yeah," I said. Then he smiled, kissed me again, and walked out of the room. A minute later, I heard the front door close. I stayed in bed until I heard his truck start and drive away. Then I got up, walked downstairs, and stood in the kitchen staring at the door that led to the garage. The keypad blinked softly on the wall. Still locked, still red. For a long time, I just stood there thinking about everything I'd seen on that phone. Then I grabbed my purse, walked outside, and got in my car. Because there was only one way I was going to get answers now. If my husband was spending Saturday somewhere else, I was going to find out exactly where. I waited until I was halfway down the block before I even started the car. Not because I was trying to be sneaky. It was more like my body needed a minute to catch up with what my brain had already decided. The sky was pale gray with that thin morning light that makes everything look washed out. The neighborhood was quiet, except for a dog barking somewhere behind a fence and a lawn sprinkler ticking back and forth across someone's yard. Mark's truck had already disappeared around the corner. For 10 years, I'd watched that truck pull away from our house without a second thought. That morning, I felt like I was seeing it for the first time.
I drove slowly toward the main road, my mind racing through every possibility. I knew where he worked during the week. I knew his coworkers, his boss, the office building downtown. But Saturdays had always been this vague volunteer thing somewhere on the east side. I'd never questioned it, which in hindsight felt unbelievably naive. When I reached the stoplight at the end of the neighborhood, I hesitated. If he was really going to some volunteer construction site, the east side was about a 20-minute drive, so I turned that direction. At first, it felt ridiculous, like I was in some cheap movie about suspicious wives. I kept expecting to see his truck already gone, already too far ahead. But 5 minutes later, I spotted it. The dark blue Ford F-150 I'd ridden in 1,000 times. 2 cars ahead of me at a red light. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. My first instinct was to turn around, go home, pretend I hadn't seen it, pretend none of this was happening. But the light turned green and the truck moved forward, and I followed. Traffic was light enough that I could keep him in sight without getting too close. Every time we stopped at a light, I felt like my heart was going to punch through my ribs, because if he looked in his rearview mirror and recognized my car, everything would explode right there in the middle of the road. But he never looked back. He drove straight through downtown, then toward the older industrial neighborhoods past the river. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. The community housing projects Mark had mentioned were supposed to be farther east, in residential areas with small houses and aging apartment buildings. This area was different. Old warehouses, auto shops, storage units, half-empty parking lots surrounded by chain-link fences. Not the kind of place you'd picture volunteers fixing up family homes. My stomach twisted tighter with every turn he made. Then, after about 15 minutes, he pulled into a gravel lot beside a long brick building that looked like it used to be some kind of factory. The sign on the side was faded almost beyond recognition. Something Supply Company. Closed from the looks of it. There were only 2 other vehicles in the lot, Mark's truck and a small white sedan. He parked near a side door and got out. I slowed my car and kept driving past the lot like I didn't even notice it. But in the rearview mirror, I saw him walk up to the door and punch in a code on a keypad mounted beside it. The door clicked open. He stepped inside, and the door shut behind him. I drove another half-mile before pulling into an empty parking lot beside a tire shop. My whole body was shaking, because none of that looked like a volunteer construction site. It looked like somewhere someone went when they didn't want to be seen. I sat there for a long time gripping the steering wheel. Then I did something that probably sounds insane now. I turned the car around. If my husband was inside that building with another woman, I wasn't going to sit in a parking lot imagining it. I needed to see. The gravel crunched under my tires when I pulled into the lot. My pulse spiked instantly, like the sound alone might give me away. Mark's truck was still there. The white sedan was still there. I parked at the far edge of the lot near a row of dumpsters. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the building. The brick walls were weathered and cracked in places. Some of the windows had been boarded up. Others were dusty and dark. It looked abandoned, except it clearly wasn't. I got out of the car. The air smelled faintly like oil and cold metal. Each step across the gravel felt louder than it should have. When I reached the side door, I saw the keypad he'd used. Same style as the one in our garage. Black box, blue backlit numbers. I stared at it for a second. Then, almost without thinking, I typed the old code. The keypad blinked red. Of course it did. My heart sank a little. Then I noticed something else. The door itself wasn't fully closed. It was pulled tight, but the latch hadn't completely caught. I pushed gently. The door opened with a soft creak. Inside was a narrow hallway lit by fluorescent ceiling lights. And voices. I froze immediately. They were coming from deeper inside the building. One of them was Mark's. I knew that voice better than anyone. "I told you she's getting suspicious," he was saying. A woman answered. Her voice was softer, a little nervous. "Well, you can't keep lying forever." "I'm not lying forever," Mark said. "Just until everything's ready." My chest felt like it had been hollowed out. I moved slowly down the hallway, staying close to the wall. The voices were coming from a large open room ahead. When I reached the doorway, I stopped, because what I saw inside made the entire situation feel even stranger. The room had clearly been renovated recently. Fresh drywall, new lighting, polished concrete floor. And in the center of it, furniture. A couch, a coffee table, a small dining table with 2 chairs. It looked like a loft apartment someone had built inside an old warehouse. Mark was standing near the couch, and sitting on it was a woman I'd never seen before. She looked younger than me, maybe late 20s. Long brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She was wearing one of Mark's hoodies. My stomach twisted so violently I had to grab the doorframe to steady myself. The woman looked up first. Her eyes widened instantly. "Mark?" He turned. For a split second, none of us moved. Then his face drained of color. "Jess?" The sound of my name coming out of his mouth in that moment felt surreal. I stepped into the room slowly. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "Volunteer work?" Neither of them answered. I looked around the room again, at the furniture, at the blankets folded on a couch, at the half-empty coffee mug on the table. Then I looked back at my husband. "How long?" I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it again. The woman stood up slowly, clearly unsure whether she should leave or stay. And that's when I noticed something that made the entire situation shift in a direction I never could have predicted. Her hand rested unconsciously on her stomach. Not dramatically, just lightly, the way people do without thinking. And for the first time I realized, she was pregnant. The room felt suddenly silent in a way that made my ears ring. I looked from her stomach back to Mark. And in that moment I understood that whatever was happening here was bigger than just an affair. Much bigger. For a few seconds after I realized she was pregnant, nobody in the room said a word. The silence was so thick it almost felt physical, like the air had turned into something heavy pressing against my chest. Mark looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. His eyes kept flicking between me and the woman beside him, like he was trying to calculate which disaster to deal with first. The woman, who was still wearing his hoodie, looked terrified, not defensive, not smug, just scared, and that made everything feel even stranger. Because this didn't look like the dramatic cheating confrontation scenes you see in movies. There was no yelling, no instant shouting or accusations flying across the room. It felt more like walking into the middle of a secret life that had been quietly unfolding behind my back for months, maybe longer. I crossed my arms without realizing it. "How long?" I asked again.
My voice sounded steadier now. Mark ran a hand through his hair.
a nervous habit he'd had since college. "Jess, I can explain." "Great," I said, "because I'm standing in what looks like a fully furnished apartment inside a warehouse you apparently come to every Saturday, and she's wearing your clothes." Neither of them spoke. My eyes moved slowly around the room again. There was a kitchenette along one wall, small fridge, microwave, shelves with dishes, a folded blanket on the couch, a stack of magazines on the coffee table. This wasn't somewhere you met someone occasionally. This was somewhere someone lived. I looked back at him. "You built this," I said quietly. He nodded once. "Yes." "For her?" Another pause. "Yes." Something inside me cracked then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet break somewhere deep in my chest. "And the garage?" I said slowly. "The garage at our house? That's part of this too, isn't it?" His jaw tightened. "Jess, answer the question." "Yes," he said finally. The woman shifted slightly beside him, still silent. I felt my hands start to tremble, so I shoved them into the pockets of my coat. "You told me you were building me an art studio." "I was going to," he said quickly. "At first, that was the plan." "At first." The words echoed strangely in the room. I let out a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "So what happened between building your wife a studio and building your pregnant girlfriend an apartment in an abandoned factory?" The woman flinched at the word girlfriend. That caught my attention immediately, because she looked at Mark then, not at me, at him, like she was waiting for something. Mark's shoulders sagged. "Jess, this isn't what you think." I stared at him. "You should be really careful with that sentence," I said quietly, "because I've already seen the text messages." That wiped whatever rehearsed explanation he had right off his face. The woman spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft. "Mark, you told me she knew." The room went completely still. My eyes slowly moved to her. "I'm sorry," I said. "He told you what?" Her face turned pale. "He said you two were separated." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Separated. I looked back at Mark. He looked like a man who had just been shoved off a cliff. "You told her we were separated?" I said. He didn't answer. "You told her your wife of 10 years was just, what, a technicality?" "Jess, please. When exactly did we separate, Mark?" My voice rose for the first time. "Was it before or after you started bringing another woman into our garage?" The woman's head snapped toward him. "Our garage?" she said. Now it was Mark's turn to look trapped. The silence stretched painfully. Then the woman spoke again, slower this time. "You told me the garage was part of your old house, the one you used to live in." My stomach dropped. "Oh my God," I whispered. Her eyes moved between us, realization spreading across her face like a shadow. "You're still living there," she said to him. Mark didn't speak. "You told me you moved out months ago." I felt something bitter and hollow twist inside me. "So you lied to both of us," I said. He rubbed his face with both hands like the entire situation might disappear if he pressed hard enough. "It got complicated." That was the sentence he chose. "It got complicated." The woman took a step back from him. "You said the baby was the reason you were getting a new place," she said quietly. "I am getting a new place," he insisted. She shook her head slowly. "No, you're hiding us in a warehouse." I suddenly felt exhausted in a way that went deeper than just being tired. The kind of exhaustion that hits when something in your life ends all at once. I looked around the room one last time. The couch, the table, the small attempt at making this place feel like a home. Then I looked back at Mark. "You built 2 secret spaces," I said. He frowned slightly. "What?" "The garage," I continued, "and this place." Neither of them spoke. "The garage wasn't just a workshop. It was where you brought her sometimes, wasn't it?" His silence confirmed it. "That's why the code changed," I said. The woman looked horrified. "You told me that was a rental property you were fixing up." Mark looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. But the strangest thing about that moment was that my anger had started fading. Not because what he did wasn't horrible, but because the entire situation had become so absurdly tangled that it felt almost unreal. I took a slow breath. Then I said the only thing that felt clear anymore. "I'm filing for divorce." Mark's head snapped up. "Jess." "No," I said calmly. "Don't start negotiating now." The woman sat back down slowly on the couch, looking like someone who had just watched a building collapse. I pulled my car keys from my pocket. "You can explain your double life to whoever you want," I said. "But I'm done being part of it." Mark stepped toward me. "Please don't do this right now. We need to talk about this." I looked at him for a long moment.
The man I had loved for a decade. The man who had somehow been living two completely different lives at the same time. Then I shook my head. We already did. And I walked out of the warehouse. The cold air outside hit my face like a reset button. When I got into my car, my hands were finally steady. I started the engine and drove away from the gravel lot without looking back. Behind me was a secret apartment, a pregnant stranger, and a husband who had built an entire web of lies that couldn't hold itself together anymore. And for the first time since I saw that text message, my mind felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, but clear. Because whatever came next would at least be honest. And after everything I'd just seen, that was the only thing that mattered anymore.